I'll be sharing my screen in a moment.
Okay, that's great. I can see that.
Oh, am I sharing already?
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you, Risa, for giving me the opportunity, the honor of presenting to this group. Thanks to everybody that have joined, have taken the time to join. Hopefully we're going to do a great next 40, 50 minutes and reserve 10 minutes for questions and answers. But as Risa said, we encourage the questions as we go, so we make it a little more dynamic as we can. So the title of this presentation is ETL Avoiding Costly Mistakes, and it's really about looking at the different things that has gone wrong on the number of projects that have been involved and the number of projects that have had the chance to work on. I have been working on data warehousing and data integration for 16 years now, so I have had the pleasure and sometimes the honor of working on projects that has been very costly from the implementation standpoint of view. And what I did is just to gather a kind of group of lessons learned from those implementations. Let me go ahead and play this. So a little bit about me. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, so this is the afternoon for me. I'm a SQL Server MVP and also a co-lead of the BI, Charlotte BI group in North Carolina and the United States. This is my contact information. I guess the most relevant part from this slide. In case that you have any follow-up questions, feel free to contact me either via my blog, Twitter, or email. So I always like to start this presentation with a little bit of a story, right? That once upon a time, that company that it was having good time because everything, all the operations were run within a single system. Everybody was happy because they were able to report out of the same database until companies started growing, more systems, more sub-organizations started appearing into the picture, and now the getting that information out of there to make sense out of that, to do analysis, to do reporting, became a little bit of an issue. And this is when this smart business guy had the great idea, the aha moment, and say, well, I think if we just, engage our IT friends and ask them to do some magic to bring things together and create a report, the users are going to love it, and they did. And the first set of users were very happy. But there is always this person that is unhappy because either the data didn't make sense, there were data quality issues, the data was late for certain days of the week, and that was solved and patched along the way by IT, but the problem started crippling until a lot of people start being very upset about that, and our solution went a little bit sideways, right? So many reasons for these kind of things to happen. ETL is a pain point on many places. The data integration problem still is one of the largest problems that remain yet to be addressed on a good way. And typically the group of problems that I tend to see on my experience is that the reliability of the system. The ETL fails too often, or the ETL finishes but give us false positive. It finished, but it wasn't. The data is not complete. The data is not accurate. So a little bit of reliability, data quality mix, and also the uncontrolled growth of the solution, where maintaining the solution becomes quite of a chore, and obviously that translates into a lot of missed opportunities. How do we get there? Well, in my experience, we follow the fire drill approach. The business asks for something, and we do a kind of one-off type of solution, ETL solution, to fulfill that need. Or we have multiple projects, we don't talk across projects, and we ended up creating this little bit of heterogeneous solutions with his own way of making, of doing the same thing on different ways. Another problem is that we try to accomplish too much all at once, is what we call the big bang approach. And the other one probably goes more a little bit along the side of communications and dynamics of collaboration between IT and the business. So just to give you a little more context, this is probably a 2-3 years old survey, part of a survey that Business Week runs, and where one of the questions to the IT or the IT and the business is, tell us about the impediments to the success of your information management projects. Let's call it data warehouse, let's call it business intelligence, or any other information that project that involves information. Surprise, surprise, getting access to relevant and timely reliable data, integrating the data, or cleansing, deduplicating, and ensuring that the data is consistent, that it has good quality. Okay, so all this is kind of the context that I want to use, or the stage that I want to set for the remaining of the presentation. What we're going to be doing is very simple style here. We're going to be presenting, or I'm going to be presenting a mistake. I'm going to be telling you why I think that is a mistake. I'm going to try to give some guidelines, some recommendations to try to avoid them. Okay? Questions again? Let's ask them along the way. So let's start with the mistake number 1. It doesn't have too much with coding the ETL solution, but it starts before that, and it's ignoring what I call ignoring the data realities. We are approached as a developers and requested to build an ETL process to bring some data into the data warehouse, some data from point A to point B, and we typically go with what we are being told. And things go like this: bring this data because I need information about customers or information about employees, and you start asking questions, and what if happens if X or Y and Z is present with the data? If you have nulls or if you have invalid values, and the typical answer, that shouldn't happen. And we don't take the time to validate that, and we code just based on that assumption that the data is going to be correct. And we create this little vicious cycle of code, load, explode. We code it, we run the ETL process, and then we get failures, right? This is how typically we define the ETL process, and we start right on the implementation. We're going to go after the sources, we're going to do the clean and transformation, and we're going to load, okay? What I suggest is we take some planning, design time to do data profiling. I guess the key on this point on how to avoid this type of problems with data that are related to data quality on the source systems goes into having a correct, taking the correct amount of time to profile the data and to start building that what we call source to target mapping. What are the benefits of that? Well, before starting the project, first of all, you're going to be able to vet the level of data quality of that data, make sure that it is accurate, that it is timely, that it is complete for what you're trying to use it. Data is not just, the quality is not just black and white. Either you have good quality or you don't have it. It is very subjective because it depends on how you're going to try to use the data. And I'm going to try to give you an example in a moment. Okay. The other thing is that you're going to get an early validation of your business rules. We are being asked to, if something happens with this record, if something is present on this record, do A, if not do B. Well, but nobody's telling us if something is in between, right? But there might be conditions that are present in the data. If we take the time to data profile, we're going to be able to validate the business rule that we need to apply as part of the ETL process a lot better. The other thing is we're going to be able to estimate better and find any problems early in the process. Okay, so how do we go about doing data profiling? What I would like to do is to probably show you something that I'm surprised that not that many people, maybe if you have been an SSIS developer for a long time and you were paying attention to enhancements back in 2008 or 8R2, there was a new task that was introduced called data profiling task, okay? If you are familiar with it, well, I'm going to try to go quickly in this. This is not so much an SSIS presentation, but it's more a high level of what can you do to do better ETL processes. So this data profiling task really allows you to quickly connect to a database. In this case, I'm gonna create a quick data profile. I'm just going to ask me what connection I want to use. I already have a database with 3 tables that I want to use for this example. And it allows me to see, to either select all the tables or some tables. In this case, we're going to do all the tables. And it allows me to quickly profile for finding the percentage of null values on each individual column on that table. Finding statistics about certain columns, numeric columns, date columns, what is my mean, what is my max, what are the average values. Find the distribution values, the length of certain profile, things that will take us a lot of queries to run. If we had this data on a SQL Server table, it would probably take us a lot of time to create the scripts to do this. The data profiling task can do this for us. And what it does is it creates an XML file. And there is an application called Data Profiler Viewer, and typically I use this the first time around when I'm calling to a project and saying, listen, let's start building an ETL process for this. My first questions to them, or one of the first questions is, do you have sample data, or do you have the data source available that I can connect and get a sense for the data? And after I get that, I'll typically run a data profiling task. And let me show you this. For instance, null radius. These are all my columns, and this is the percentage of nulls. So this table is doing great from the null standpoint of view. Okay, not nulls is typically the situation that we want to find. This second table, employee, same case, but the person table probably has a little bit of a situation here where the last name is not complete for 9% of the records. So right now, just by looking at this, I can go back and ask them, hey, what happens if the last name is null? Okay, typically we would not ask that question, and the null will flow, and if there is a not null constraint on the table, boom, we're going to receive the error. If there's no constraint, well, guess what? The 9% is still null. And it's not like we're in the business of fixing the data or fixing the business problems that the data has, but we should be a good collaborator, a good partner with the business, telling them, listen, there is a 9 chances that there are 9% of this. How are you planning to use the data? Well, I'm planning to send an email campaign. And then I don't know if you have ever received an email that from a vendor saying, dear Mr. Null or dear Mr. Blank. Well, you are going to save to some of that embarrassing time, but communicating this early in the process, and then probably putting some rules in place or creating the awareness that there are problems within the data. Another things that might be probably helpful is the value distribution. Here is another thing. So we saw that the first name was always populated. But let's take a look at the value distribution. This profile allows me to see what is the commonality or the count of every value. So I can quickly see the Henrys, the Claudia, that are all the typical values, how many times are present within data. Why is this important? Because you can do a quick sort by count and probably spot here, a big problem. Typically, what is my most common name on the database? Well, I just garbage value 777 times. So they may be looking at the nulls not enough, but you need to look a little further. And obviously, this is just a quick example to spark some ideas. Your data might be different. The use that you're giving to the data might be different. But know that you have here a little tool that with low effort, you can get a quick glimpse into what the possible data quality issues you might have. Okay, this might not solve complex problems, but it's a great starting point to start that conversation about data quality when you are engaged into a project. So going back to the slide decks, that was the mistake number 1 about ignoring data realities and how to fix it through data profiling and getting familiar beforehand with the data. So let's go to the mistake number 2. Now we're down to the implementation of the ETL process, exception handling. Again, we might be facing bad requirements, bad data. We might even write bad code that might create a little bit of an unstable system if we're not careful. So the idea here is not to shoot for perfection for a system that doesn't ever fail, that don't ever fail, but rather to have things in place that if it fails, the failures are nicely handled and communicated appropriately on a timely manner. Why do we need to do this? Well, first of all, we are human. We might be writing bad code, like I said earlier. But also, as an ETL, the ETL system is always a middleware between 2 points between where you're reading this data from, or where you're sourcing the data from, and where you are loading it. So the idea here is to acknowledge that we don't own all the variables and that we can do something about that. So how can we do this? Let's say that we're building our ETL system, control flow, data flow. This is just a logical flow. How can you do this on SSIS or on any other ETL tool of your choice, maybe just route T-SQL? Let's say that you have an ETL process running. Well, there should be an exception detection, okay? If you're using an SSIS, I'm going to use a lot of SSIS analogies, assuming that this is probably the tool of choice of most people on the webinar. We can be using either the error presence constraints or the error handlers on the in SSIS. There should be a system detecting, okay, on error, do something. Well, typically that something is, let's log that error somewhere. So we have an audit trail, so we have a place to go if we need to look for further details. The second thing is probably let's send a notification. Okay, let's try to avoid that embarrassing situation where our system has been silently failing for days, if not weeks, without nobody knowing it. And finally, let's throw an error. Let's make it visible enough that that the people that need to be involved are notified. But let's go into the details. So typically as an ETL or as a data processing, data integration process, we're going to be processing data. We're going to be processing rows or batches of rows. Well, a lot of things can go wrong also at the row level or at the batch row level. We should have a data validation failure mechanism in place as well. If something happens, let's say you're processing a record, you have a business rule in place, the range of the value should be between A and B. If it's not between A and B, treat it as a data error. If a value is missing or is null on a column, treat it as an error. So now we can start isolating those bad records, and maybe we can establish a threshold for how many records can our solution accept as a valid. If the threshold is reached, maybe we need to exit with a failure, notify, listen, the threshold for errors for this batch was reached, I'm finishing with an error. But in some cases, the errors might or might not be, you might or might not be able to fix it, right? Like replacing a null value with existing an unknown or certain things, certain rules in the business that you and the business agree upon. So if the value can be fixed, well, guess what? We're going to apply that rule to fix it and continue the process. And if the problem cannot be fixed, we should be thinking on creating that reject record file, database, table, whatever you want to call it, but start accumulating there the reject record so that at some point you can send that back to the business for review, for auditing purposes, for whatever, protect your back, if you will, that things are matching or are conciliating between what is read from the source and what is being loaded into your destination or target. So how do you go about creating an ETL exception handling process? Well, first of all, identify the sources of exception. At the very, very high level, it's going to be either a data problem or it's going to be an infrastructure problem. Okay, infrastructure means many things here. Connecting to the sources. Maybe the sources are not available. Maybe having a way to validate, to ping that connection. Is the connection available? Yes, then I start the process. Is the connection not available? Then I handle that situation by sending the notification, by exiting with a failure. Maybe do I have enough space on the FTP or on the file drive where I'm intending to move a file, or do I have enough space, or are the objects of the file that I'm trying to gather available? All that external variables that you could check, you have to establish, kind of keep things in balance. At some point we need to stop validating. We cannot just call for every situation possible, but there is a number of situations that we could and we should validate. Which ones are the most important? You have the answer. That will be based on what is important for you to know, to react to, based on your business requirements, based on your technical business requirements, and your own situation. The other thing is, let's be consistent. Let's start establishing design patterns and infrastructure framework, if you will, to do things on the same way every time. And the beauty of this is that it gets reusable, because the moment that you have to move data or implement an additional ETL system for a different project, you can reuse the same exception handling process that you have created before. So keeping consistent, make sure that you keep an eye on your data error table or into your data rejection file. And the last thing is, if you decide on when you are handling data errors, just make sure to create a look back to either to the business, to a data steward, to somebody on the technical team to look at those errors, because at some point things has to match. So if you read hundreds of records from the data source and you only loaded 90, what are the other things? Okay, there might be valid reasons for rejecting, but there should be a look back or a process to monitor those errors in place. We're going to move to the next mistake. Like I said, this is a very dynamic session, so a mistake and the fix for those mistakes. At the end, I'm going to have also resources where you can have, where I'm posting links about how you can do actually code examples or implementations that are in place for what I'm talking about. So it's more than just the logical flow or the high-level concept. I'm also going to offer some practical samples that are available online. The next mistake that I want to talk about is the logging. Having inadequate logging. It's not about just not having logging. Sometimes we have logging, but logging is not capturing what is meaningful or what is relevant. Okay, so it's not just about not having it, but having it, capturing what is relevant, or capturing or making sure that it's not capturing more than that it should be doing. Okay, why is this important? Well, let's start about 4 different scenarios. As the owner of a data integration system, at some point something is going to break. We're going to need as much information about the error as we can. Sometimes errors can get very hard to troubleshoot. The more information that you have, the easier it's going to make your life. The other point, or the other way that we can use logging for is also to monitor the ETL, the ETL solution, to be able to answer the question, what is this process doing at this point in time? If the ETL process takes 10 minutes, there might not be that much of the value. But it is very often the case where we have long-running ETL processes where our ETL window might be 5 or 6 hours, and we don't want to find out after 6 hours that things are running behind. So we can actually use or leverage some part of the logging or create logging tables or mechanisms to monitor the execution of the ETL process. The other thing is, what happened? How do you go about avoiding the perception issue of, oh, this seems to be running slow? Well, we should be able to actually tell if this is running slower or not than before. We have a good logging time window of data that we can analyze. We're going to be on a better position to be able to tell how exactly and when exactly things started to slow down. And the last one is auditing. Okay, depending on the type of industry that you work, depending on the type of project, depending on the type of data you're treating, you might be subject to a strict auditing regulations. So you need to make sure that you create some auditing tables, and you can use a logging system to be able to leverage that. What information are you going to store? Well, I would suggest you look at these 4 scenarios: troubleshooting, monitoring, performance tuning, and auditing, before you decide what kind of information you are going to store. Okay, especially the auditing, where it might be subject to high difference depending on the type of environment or company or country that you are working. So how do we go about creating a logging mechanism? Well, first of all, let's evaluate our options. What is the tool that we're using? SSIS. Well, SSIS, starting on 2012, has a nicer story about logging. Well, first of all, logging you don't have to code for the login on each individual package. That can be turned on and off after the solution has been deployed. There is support. There are already tables, a catalog, a set of objects on SSIS on a database repository that is going to be capturing some level of information, and you can switch it on and off, and you can change the level of detail that you're going to be capturing on every execution. Is that going to be enough? More often than not, the question is not. Built-in login solutions in ETL tools tends to be very operational, tend to be a lot around this process is running, and this is all the metadata or all the logging about that process that is running. But typically, those solutions are not aware of your logical business unit of work, if you will. Right? You might want to log things separately depending on the business process or the subject area of your data warehouse that you're running. So you might be able to actually evaluate, when you're evaluating the options, find yourself using them both. A built-in solution coupled with probably some level of custom logging. Always start simple and then add as you need, okay? Just make sure you follow a modular approach so it's easy for you to turn on and off or capture more or less events depending on what you're trying to do. For troubleshooting and for monitoring, probably with start, completions, errors, warnings, it should be enough. But for auditing, you might need to evaluate that a little bit closer. And don't forget to add a reporting layer on top of your login information, again, depending on the case. For auditing, you might want to create certain reports that look at certain things, certain metrics. For monitoring, your reports might look a little different. Good thing is that on SSIS 2012 and onwards, you also get a nice set of starting reports on top of those built-in tables. And there are other options. Let me show you an example right now. This is just a snippet, a partial model of SSIS DB. This is if you are using SSIS 2012 or 2014, and if you are using the new project deployment model. In this case, the login comes for free. There is already built-in features that allows you to populate this, that internally populates these tables and allows you to get a better sense of what has been running on your ETL process, okay? And my example here, this is on the left of the screen, is kind of 3 basic login tables of a custom ETL framework that I have used for a long time, where I have the concept of an ETL batch or an ETL process. Maybe I have 2 data marts, so I want to identify uniquely, well, this is the execution or the package that I run for the data mart 1, and I want to separate that from my data mart 2. So I can accomplish that by creating that 2 levels, if you will, of login at the ETL batch and at the ETL checkpoint. Typically, I use the ETL batch as that logical unit of work or set of packages that run together. Data mart A versus data mart B. That used to be probably would be 2 records on the ETL batch every time that the solution runs. An ETL checkpoint is probably something a lower grain, like the individual package that runs inside of those processes. And for that, I would like to probably cross-check or be able to join with the operational custom SSIS login the built-in, to combine the custom login and the built-in login. And all I did, or all you can do, is just to create some sort of bridge table and make sure that your referential integrity is in place. How do you accomplish this? Well, very easy. Set of tables, set of the procedures that are part of your SSIS templates that get executed at the beginning of the package, at the beginning and at the end of the package, and you start capturing this information. And this is kind of a kind of logical example of how you accomplish that. I have on the resources slide a link to a blog post where you can get a little more information about this approach if you're interested in looking further. This is kind of the examples that I want to talk about, the reporting on the reporting side. On the left-hand side, you have the built-in reports. Again, SSIS 2012, SSIS 2014. you have a set of reports when you use the project deployment model, where you can have a dashboard, what has happened in the last 24 hours, and then you have sub-reports for all executions, all validations, operations, connections, and you have a set of 7 or 8 reports. Also on Codeplex, and this is for a fellow MVP, Jamie Thompson, he created what he calls an SSIS reporting pack, and is also his attempt on exploring and exposing that login information that is on the SSIS DB. So these are probably 2 sources for you to start getting familiar on what kind of reporting you want to have when looking at the login information of your ETL process. Right, this has been a lot of talking. We are halfway through. I just want to quickly check with Risa in case that we have any questions.
Actually, there was just only one question that was about quality of sound, and I think that's covered because I think that was because of the sound of my device, because your one is completely good. I can hear it properly. There is no more questions so far.
All right, all right. Excellent. So let's keep going.
Okay.
So this is another big one, especially relevant when you're dealing with processes that involve a lot of units of work, store procedures, packages, whatever you're doing. It is a complex chain process that typically takes several hours to run. Okay, it's not atypical that we have that type of processes. Well, the mistake here goes about not having a nice way to recover after a failure. Okay, and always do the analogy with the video games. How hateful would be that after spending 2-3 hours on our favorite game, we get stuck on one level that we cannot fail, and that we cannot pass, that we fail, and we have to start from scratch. I'm sure we will hate that video game and will not play it again, right? It's always nice to say, well, let me restart at this step. Well, not quite the same, but kind of drawing the parallel, we could attempt to do, and we should try to attempt to do, especially on long-running processes, to do the same. So if our post-failure has something like, I have to do a manual cleanup before restarting. If I don't do it correctly, I might be missing data because the source system is changing quite rapidly, and I might be missing transition or changes within the data source. Or if I'm not careful, I might run the strikes again. I'm going to duplicate the data. Or maybe I need to start from scratch. If you answered yes to any of these questions, maybe there are things that you can do a little better to avoid this type of problems, okay? You want to have a seamless recovery. It's not like if it failed, it's going to restart itself and it's going to fix itself. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, well, if it fails, you're going to investigate the root of the failure. After that problem is addressed, the idea is that you run the process, and the process should be able to figure out what it was left off. It should be able to skip what it needs to skip. It should be able to execute what it needs to be executed. Before finishing, it should have all the cleanup, any necessary logic for cleanup embedded. So again, because this is quite probably a little more of a complex process, let's look at an example, okay? So before we look at the example, the first thing is we need to define what is our unit of recovery. For processes that execute relatively quickly, maybe we don't need so much of this. We will be just fine with truncating and reloading if we can afford that. That's probably the simplest approach to the recovery problem. But like I said, sometimes you cannot afford that because either it takes too long or because you cannot just go ahead and truncate the target tables. So the first thing is just to define what is your unit of recovery. Typically, I define 2 levels. One is the whole ETL process, and then what I call ETL steps. So doing an analogy on real world, maybe I have a set of packages for populating a data mart from human resources. Well, the human resources is data mart is my logical unit of what is what I'm going to call the ETL process. And every individual package that I create underneath, and where I set the presence are going to be my ETL steps. So right there I have the definition of my units of recovery. And then every time that I'm going to start a process or I'm going to start a step, I'm going to be using multi-value logic. At the process level, two things I'm going to be checking. Did this process succeed or did this process fail? And based on that, I'm going to make some decisions. Similarly, when you're executing the sub-processes, the steps, or the individual SSIS packages, if we want to follow the same example, then I'm going to be checking for three things. Either that step already ran and succeeded, or it ran but it failed, or it didn't even get to run, okay? Because we're dealing with a halfway through failure. So, and again, the thing is that we want to put it on to reiterate, and the checklist on the right is just the things that we want to make sure which our framework or stability approach pattern should be able to accomplish. That we are able to start from the point of failure, that doesn't skip or miss change data, that doesn't cause duplicates, that doesn't require any manual cleanup, and maybe that we are able to execute concurrent instances of the process if it's applicable. Okay? So let's look at again at the logic flow of this. The ETL process starts. What we're gonna check is, because we already did the homework and because we already have logging tables that capture the start and the end of the processes, we should be able to go back to those tables and say, look, I'm running the human resources data mart. Did the last, what was the status of the previous execution? So if it succeeded, let's issue a new ID and a new execution ID, and let's start. Okay, log process start. And then start executing all the individual processes or sub-processes, individual packages of the process. The second scenario, remember that I told you there is a two-value logic. The second scenario is previous process succeeded. The answer is, oh, I'm sorry, and then we log the end of the process. If something, if the previous process didn't complete it successfully, then we're going to reuse the same execution ID. Why? Because I want to track perhaps how many times, how many retries, how many times I have to rerun the process before it succeeded. Again, let's call it audit. I found that they are having this approach, it works nicely because I'm able to see on which days, how many times I have to retry or rerun the ETL process. But anyway, if the previous process didn't complete successful, then I'm going to reuse the same execution ID. I'm going to increase the counters or update the variables that it needs to be updated, indicating that I'm starting after a failure, and I'm going to start calling all the steps that are involved. Okay, this is the two-value logic at the pattern level, at the ETL process level. Okay, now the ETL step or the packages. Okay, the previous process is going to start calling these packages on the order that you have defined. Either it's because it's metadata driven, or because you created a master package and you connected all the packages via presence constraint. Regardless of how you decide to do it, this is the logical flow that I use. Well, first of all, I'm going to start similarly than I did before. I'm going to check what is the status of the execution of this package, okay, the last time I did run. And then I'm going to ask a question, a slightly different question. This time I'm going to ask, have this step run before under this execution ID, pattern execution ID? If the answer is no, well, just run the step and update that when the step finishes, and then you're going to return control to the calling process, okay? Then the next package is going to run, but this time is something different. Has this run before? Yes, it did run before. Well, now the second question is, did this step succeed? If it's yes, well, skip it. Do not run it, because that way they avoid having duplicates and I avoid redoing the same work, okay? Now, the third package is the one that has a partial execution. That was the package that was executing with something something fails. So it has a start time, might not have an end time, it might have an error code associated to it. So in this case, for those packages, what we can do is we're going to do any cleanup work that it might be required. In some cases, we don't need to do that. Sometimes our ETL process can be written in a way that are self-healing. But in some cases, you might need to delete that batch of records before you reloading it because you don't know how many records might have succeeded, and you want to have a clean start for that particular package. So in this case, you will do the cleanup of partial execution if it's applicable, and then you run that step from the beginning. So right there on 2 slides, having 2 levels, the master level and probably the child level, and a simple 2-value and 3-value type of logic, you should be able to accomplish have a nice restability pattern that fulfills most of the common scenarios that have been faced. Now, let's switch gears here a little bit, because as we face or as we tackle new projects on ETL, on data integration, we also face other non-technical issues, and I want to make sure that we spend at least a slide or 5 minutes into that.
Sorry,
and that has yes.
There's a question that I've assigned to you. It's about, isn't execution ID a system variable?
That's an excellent question.
Yes.
No, I like to, the execution ID that I'm talking about here is typically something that I generate as a part of my custom logic, login logic. So on this case, what I use for restability are the IDs that I generate as a part of the logic that I'm implementing. There are other execution IDs that are generated and tracked by SSIS. I do not use that because those typically don't have the logical concept, my logical unit of work. He's not aware of my logical unit of work. Every time that you run a package, a new execution ID is generated. So to me, to interpret that is a little more harder or maybe meaningless. On the other hand, if you generate this as a part of your framework, if you will, as a part of your custom login, you will have control and you will be able to differentiate, okay, this is the same ID that I ran before. So yeah, short answer, no, this is not a system generated.
Okay.
It's not built in, it's generated by the custom logic.
Great, thank you for that. There is also another question about how would you handle a loop for restartability? For example, a list of database servers to loop through and pull data. Could each iteration be considered as a step?
That's what I typically do. On my step login table has an extra column that is could be called iteration or instance. Basically, you're running multiple instances of the same package, if you will. What you're doing is maybe passing a different database name. So I accomplish that by adding that extra column on the ETL checkpoint or the ETL package login table.
Okay, great. And the last question is, can we use checkpoints to implement restartability? Doesn't have performance impact?
That's a great point. I'm assuming that we're talking about the SSIS checkpoint, internal checkpoints. Actually, this framework that I put in place many years ago, probably in the 2005, SQL Server 2005 days, is because of the shortcomings of the internal SSIS checkpoint. There are a lot of shortcomings, drawbacks when you're using those checkpoints. So I implement this type of logic, and I do not use SSIS checkpoints files.
Okay, great. That's all the questions that we have so far.
All right. Thank you so much. So this is kind of the other type of problems that I see. It might not be 100% just related or natural and tied to data integration problems, but it has to do with the way that we drive this type of projects. BI projects, especially if you're on data warehousing BI, they're very dynamic. So the waterfall approach sometimes doesn't work well. You have a big project, you have to implement 3-5 business areas into your data warehouse and you come up with a high-level estimate of 6 months, and you take 3 weeks to design and then the rest to implement, that's not going to fly. What you want to do is to fail often, to fail soon. Okay, so you have the ability to recover from those failures and correct the course. So make sure that you pick a methodology that fits your needs. Typically more towards, my suggestion is always looking more towards the agile side of the house as opposed of doing the waterfall approach. The other thing is business and the IT collaboration. So yes, we're IT, we're developers. Sometimes we feel very, very strong about telling the business you don't know what you really need or you don't know the data as much as I need. But honestly, we need to make the case or make the point that we need to collaborate. Ultimately, they are the ones that are going to be using the information. Ultimately, they are probably the subject matter experts of what is around that data, and that's probably a job that you don't want to take over. We have our plate full already with being able to design and develop a solution that is sustainable and that performs the job as indicated. The other thing is about the velocity and how quickly we can respond to requests for new data, for new data integration projects. Okay, so my suggestion is, from the methodology standpoint of view, is make sure we tackle or we subdivide the work, we scope it, and we go in smaller chunks, so we keep things flexible. Again, just probably looking at agile methodologies and see how we can apply that to our ETL projects would be my recommendation number one. And the collaboration is just make sure we have that open channel of communication with them. We collaborate with them, and especially that we make the point, we drive the point home that the data quality is a business problem that needs to be owned by the business. It's very often the case where we receive the call is the data doesn't look right. You have to fix it. And it's not that we don't want to, but it's just that we need to make sure we have a clear definition of what right means, what wrong means, so we can do something to help them. Okay? Sometimes the problems come just from the data sources, and our project as a data integration, as a data warehouse team is just acting as a magnifying glass over the problem. And the third one about the velocity and how we can IT keep up with the demands for more data is probably to start exploring into the self-service technologies. Self-service has been around for a long time, especially on the front end side, on the data visualization side. A lot of the new data visualization tools also comes with plugins or with some modules that allows you to tap different heterogeneous data source systems and leverage that, or allow them to the end users to kind of do their own self-service data exploration, data discovery. I will invite the guys on the call that might not be familiar to probably look at things like Power Query in Excel and what kind of things the end users could do at their own as opposed of asking us, okay? Especially on this type of projects where it's a one-off, when it's a one exploratory thing. We tend to create solutions, or our first intention is to create solutions that are robust enough, that can be run multiple times, but in many cases that's not even a requirement. So maybe exploring the self-service technologies on the data integration, on the ETL side, is something that might help. I know that there are recordings on this chapter about Power Query, previous presentations. That probably would be a good idea to explore. We are getting close to wrap up this. So on my abstract, I offer a checklist. So we'll look at some mistakes, and I also offer to probably give you a checklist of things that you need to start thinking, especially when you're building that data integration, that ETL solution, that ETL framework, if you will, that you are planning to reuse, that you're planning to grow over time as more data or business areas are join or jump into the project. These are kind of the things that I will be looking about. Before starting any project, we talk about this data profiling, okay? Something that we didn't talk about, because it's always a big, it depends on the type of system that you have. You have to look at the data extraction strategy, how you're going to detect change data in your source system. it is even worth to try to detect the changes as opposed to extracting everything and trying to figure out the changes on the fly, or is it worth to implement to look at TDC type of technology, change data capture technology to allow you to easy that? Are you going to stage the data or no? How often are you going to stage it? Every time that you change it, or just from the source? Are you going to use source system files, file system, flat files type of staging area, or are you going to use tables? All those are things that you need to start thinking about when designing and implementing a data integration solution. At the time of instrumentation and management, think about exception handling. We saw some examples. Same for logging, alerting, and notification. We didn't talk about that so quickly there. Is just make sure that you create an alerting system that the appropriate party is notified on time when something happens. Avoid silly notifications like everything is good every morning. After a while, those notifications tend to ignore. Make sure you make sure you notify, you alert people when there's action required. Auditing, recovering, monitoring. How you're going to schedule and set up your dependencies across job. What are the handshakes between the source system telling you that you are ready to do? Avoid scheduling ETL solutions based on the time of the day. This ETL process should start every morning at 6 in the morning. And what happens is maybe you're waiting a file that sometimes shows up a little late, and you didn't implement a handling mechanism, and then the ETL reports a successful completion with no data. I have seen those cases. As silly as it sounds, I've seen a lot of those implementations. So make sure that your scheduling and your handshake or precedence check logic is robust. How are you going to archive data? So yes, the storage is cheap, but IOs are not. So if you just keep growing and growing your tables and your users are only interested in the last month or in the last year worth of data, you have 10 years online, at some point your performance is going to start suffering. So start thinking on a data archiving strategy. How you're going to recover after, if you have a disaster. Make sure you think about recovery, backups, and all that. Security and compliance. Again, very subject to the place and the industry that you work, the country that you are. So I don't have a particular example on security compliance, but I'm sure that if you work on industries like banking or healthcare, you know what I'm talking about. Finally, on the others, just little things about the way that you're going to drive your projects. Again, Agile is probably seems like a very popular theme out there, and I have had a lot of success on running data integration, data warehousing, BI projects using Agile methodologies. The data quality point, the collaboration point between business and IT, I can't stress that enough. And the other thing is just, if you are a fan of conventional standards, make sure you have that beforehand before you start a new project. These are some of the resources that I have in place. So the Data Warehouse Toolkit, the ETL book talks about 34 subsystems. So I just give you probably a glimpse of the things that based on my experience seems to pose the most issues when building ETL projects. But the data warehouse, the Kimball group, and in the Data Warehouse Toolkit book has a good set of things that you need to think about, that you need to have into account when building an ETL architecture. The example about SSIS via custom logging, this is a blog post in my blog, and the report SSIS reporting pack that we also look as an example is on Codeplex. That SSIS reporting pack Codeplex project actually was enhanced recently to also include restability functionality, so it's worth a look. That's the end of my presentation. This is my contact information, and now I'm passing this to you, Rhys, in case that we have additional questions.
Thank you, Rafael, for the good presentation. Right now, there is no question, just Edward Jones sent a response that no question, just wanted to say thanks, good points to review and refresh. and no more question. But yeah, that was very useful session. Lots of learning for me as well. Thank you for doing that presentation. We will put recording of this session in our YouTube channel. So just search inside YouTube for PAS BI virtual chapter. And okay, one of the questions is that will there be a recording for the session? Yes, there will be, and available to watch later on for sure.
Excellent. So
Okay.
now I hope that with this checklist, I invite everybody, even if you have an ETL framework in place, that maybe it's worth to bounce the features and the capabilities of your ETL framework against the checklist that I'm giving you, and just make sure that you have all the ducks in a row, that everything is solid, because typically ETL architecture is not just static. It's something that, well, you need to revisit from time to time and do a health checkup from time to time. So thank you so much again for having me, Riz, and thank you for to all of you that took the time to attend.
Thank you for presentation, and thank you to you all attendees. See you again in next webinar. Cheers.